What is up, guys? This is Luke Hill for Kit Guru, and this is the PCSpecialist Gladius i7 gaming system. Nvidia's RTX 3080 is hot on the shelves, well, stock levels dependent of course, but it makes perfect sense that PCSpecialist has updated one of their higher end gaming systems with a brand new Nvidia card. So built around a gigabyte triple fan equipped RTX 3080 graphics card and a Core i7-10700K, can this sub $2,000 gaming PC prove to be pretty much an FPS powerhouse? Let's have a look. But before we get into that, if you like what we do here at Kit Guru, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like our videos, comment, let us know your feedback. Head on over to the Kit Guru website, that really helps us out. That's where we do a lot of our written testing and written analysis and our photos. And then you can also support us on Patreon and on our merch store if you want a cool t-shirt like this. Let's jump back into it. Coming in at the £1,999, so just in before the lock for $2,000 price point, PCSpecialist is clearly aiming for core gaming performance when it comes to the Gladius i7. That point really is typified when you look at the Core i7 8-core processor and the RTX 3080 graphics card, and then the somewhat budget components, quite frankly, used elsewhere in order to hit that aggressive price point. So like we said, you've got the Core i7-10700K, you've got an ASUS Z490F gaming motherboard, and that's an ROG STRIX model. You've got a gigabyte triple fan RTX 3080 graphics card, 16 gigs of Corsair DDR4, you've got a 240mm AIO liquid cooler, NZXT H511 chassis, 1TB Samsung SSD, 1TB of Seagate HDD storage, and a 750W Corsair power supply. And if you're interested, you also get a basic wireless adapter. It's pretty obvious then that the processor and the graphics card are the star of the show, and that's probably the way it should be in most gaming systems. So, you know, PCSpecialist has been quite aggressive under that $2,000 price point. Let's have a closer look and see how well they've done. If we start off with the graphics card, the RTX 3080, PCSpecialist has opted for a gigabyte OC model, and that's a triple fan 2.5 slot cooler. So an absolutely massive cooler with a black metal backplate. It uses dual 8-pin PCIe power connectors, and PCSpecialist doesn't use braided cables here, but they do a good enough job with cable routing in my opinion. The card has a small amount of RGB lighting on the side. It has basically no graphics card sag whatsoever, despite the fact that this system was actually shipped to us using a courier, so that's really positive to see. If you're interested in the display outputs, you get 3 DisplayPort and 2 HDMI. Overall, probably a good centerpiece for a gaming system of this caliber, in my opinion. One thing to note is that the roughly 12.5-inch brute just, and I mean just, fits inside the case with the AIO cooler mounted in the front. And I think at this point it's pertinent to address the elephant in the room, and that is Nvidia Ampere availability. Basically, if you want to buy a card as a DIY buyer, you're just going to have to sit there hitting F5 all day and cross your fingers that you get lucky. And that's not really the same approach with PCSpecialist, but don't expect to be able to buy a system like this and get a card straight away. We spoke to PCSpecialist and they said that they're having the same waits and same availability struggles that everybody else is having. So when you order this system, you will be put into a waiting list, and as a graphics card becomes available, it will be allocated to your order. If we look at the choice of processors, it's a really smart one in my opinion for a high-end gaming system. You've got the Intel 10th Gen Core i7-10700K. I think the choice of the 8-core model is smart because the 10900K, while being faster, is clearly more expensive, and the 10600K is equally as fast in many gaming titles, but when you're coupling it with an RTX 3080, I think the i7 is a good choice personally. I also like PCSpecialist's decision to use not only a high-end motherboard in the ASUS Z490F gaming with a strong VRM, and our testing will prove that. I like the decision to run the CPU at stock. Now I know alarm bells are going to be ringing as soon as you hear, hold on, K-series CPU run at stock. That's leaving frequency on the table. And yes, you're correct, it is leaving frequency on the table. But running at about 4.7 GHz for the short duration boost limit on all core workloads, and then trailing down to about 4.5 to 4.6 GHz for sustained all core long workloads. I like the way this chip operates. And the reason I like that is because the 125 watt power usage for that long duration workload on the chip is really easy to handle with a 240mm AIO. It runs relatively cool, quiet, and the heat output is tolerable. Yes, you can get another probably 300 to 500 megahertz if you want to manually overclock, and you can do that given PC Specialist's inclusion of a quality Z490 motherboard from ASUS. We asked PC Specialist about this, and they said they don't really see all that much demand from customers for overclocked processors, but if you were one of the customers who would buy and would want the processor overclocked, let us know in the comment section down below. If we now focus on some of the other components aside from the core duo of the graphics card and the processor, starting off with memory, you get 16 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RGB Pro DDR4. The rated frequency is 3200 megahertz and the timers are 16, 18, 18, so not particularly great. Pretty much a budget set as far as I'm concerned when I look at the frequency and the timings. 3200 C16 is fine with an Intel chip, but it's nothing extravagant or out of the ordinary. Of course, the extravagance comes from the RGB heat spreader, which looks great and integrates well with Corsair iQ. In terms of storage, this is one area where I was really quite impressed with PC Specialist's decision. It would have been easy to skimp on the SSD, but actually PC Specialist go all out and they go for the Samsung 970 EVO Plus NVMe SSD in 1TB form, which is one of the best M.2 SSDs on the market. And then additional storage for your photos and media and the less important stuff, I guess, or the less speed important stuff, comes from a 1TB Seagate Barracuda hard drive. Power is delivered by a Corsair RM750X power supply. That's a fully modular unit, 80 plus gold rated. In this chassis, I think the cable management's very good. Obviously, full modular power supply really helps. And I don't think the cables look too out of place. You will be able to spot them, and we have seen nicer builds, especially with braided cables. But hitting the aggressive price point, I'm perfectly fine with the compromise. Where I do question PC Specialist compromise slightly, however, is the choice of chassis. So this is the NZXT H511, which is basically a system integrator version of the NZXT H510, which is an immensely popular case and a good quality case, quite frankly. But for a $2,000 system, I'm kind of feeling like this is a little bit more budget than I would have liked at a $2,000 price point. Yes, it's a perfectly fine case. It does the job. It's compact, but it fits all of our hardware nicely. Cooling seems to be pretty reasonable. You get 2 intake fans on the radiator and 2 exhaust fans. It just seems a little bit on the budget side for this system. But of course, chassis choice is very much down to individual preference. So if you like this chassis and think that it fits perfectly, let us know in the comment section down below. The key difference between the H511 and the retail DIY versions of the H510 are basically, with this case, you get 2 Type A USB ports on the front panel and no Type C. And that's actually quite disappointing. I like to see Type C on the front panel. And if we jump back to cooling, up front cooling the Core i7 processor is a PCS, or PC Specialist, FrostFlow 240 AIO, that's an RGB version. PC Specialist actually switches out the fans to Corsair LL120 RGB models, and that is a pretty good move in my opinion from an aesthetic standpoint. Plus, to be fair, the LL120s are actually pretty decent fans overall. Given the limitations when it comes to front airflow with the chassis, PC Specialist actually mounted the fans in a pull configuration to pull through the radiator, and that's a smart choice, even if it does put you very close to the Gigabyte graphics card. Clearly, one point I need to address for the all-in-one liquid cooler, and this again goes back to the point of the case being slightly less premium than I would have liked, is that PC Specialist has mounted the AIO with the tubes facing upwards and the res on the top. Now, Gamers Nexus obviously did some superb work highlighting why this is not ideal. I will, however, point out that the tubes and the res are actually above the pump, so it's not disastrous, it's just not ideal in this scenario from a perhaps noise and longevity perspective. But given the chassis and given the graphics card, realistically, this is the only orientation you could actually use for a 240mm AIO in the front. So again, comes back to the point of perhaps a more premium case would be fitting, even if it would really constrict the budget quite a bit and put a stress on that $2,000 price point. Like I say, not a disaster, but certainly not ideal. And make sure you check out Gamers Nexus for that video. Really good work, Steve. And then in terms of other chassis fans, you've got another Corsair LL120 RGB fan as rear exhaust. This is 120mm, obviously. And then you've got a PC Specialist 120mm RGB fan in roof exhaust. So 2 intake and 2 exhaust. Pretty balanced from a cooling perspective. Probably just about fine for a system like this, even though you're going to be dumping probably half a kilowatt of heat. But our testing later in the review will see whether it is fine or not. And of course, some of the additional components that just need referencing are that you get an 802.11n 300 megabits per second Wi-Fi card in the PCIe slot. Disappointingly, this is a green PCB, so it's very ugly, quite frankly. But depending on the angle in which your system is mounted, you might not notice it all that much. And then you run in Windows 10 Home. If we look at the overall build quality from the PCSpecialist Gladius i7, it is what I would call very good. I see no real major concerns about any of the installation choices other than the AIO, but that's a limitation set by the choice of chassis. The cable management is very good. Not using braided cables is going to slightly compromise you from an aesthetic perspective. PCSpecialist does a very good job to route the cables in a tidy fashion, so I have no real complaints there. I did notice a few not fully black shrink-wrapped cables around the bottom of the motherboard. They're a little bit of an eyesore if you're being really picky. And then, like I said, the green PCB on the Wi-Fi card is ugly and slightly disappointing, I guess. And then I guess the other factor that comes into it with regards to build quality is the RGB lighting. Now, primarily using Corsair LEDs from the fans, the RAM, and also the Corsair link to the ASUS motherboard, so you can control via IQ. I think the RGB lighting looks superb. Of course, you can disable it if you prefer. So I guess that covers the main points for the PCSpecialist Gladius i7 system. I should just reference that the packaging and bundle was, as we expect from PCSpecialist, pure quality. The system was shipped with plenty of bubbles and basically protective foam on the inside that you can clearly take out. Even a novice user would understand how to take this out. Plenty of manuals, plenty of accessories, and even a spare fan. Anyway, that covers the introduction and closer look. Let's have a look at how the test system performs. When it comes to testing, we're going to be focusing on CPU performance, some GPU performance, and also clearly gaming performance, and then we'll look at some of the technical points like the thermals, like the power, like the noise. If you want more details on our testing procedure, head on over to the KitGuru website where you can see full written in-depth analysis of how we conduct the tests and our settings used in games. And then if you want to do some comparisons against your own system or perhaps one of your friend's system or some other hardware you're looking at, make sure you pause the video when the charts are on this so that you can have a closer look at them. Performance in CPU heavy tasks is as we would expect from a combination of the 8-core 10th gen Intel processor and 16 gigs of 3200 C16 DDR4. There's plenty of grunt available from the PCSpecialist Gladius i7 to handle productivity tasks such as Blender and Cinebench rendering. In terms of clock speeds, the 10700K runs at 4.7 GHz and around 140 watts package power for the initial all-core loading period. This then drops to 4.5 to 4.6 GHz sustained all-core frequency at 125 watts after the short duration turbo limit time period is surpassed. With the 100 to 200 MHz drop in all-core clock speed from the initial Cinebench NT loading period to the later runs during the sustained clock speed operation, only a small performance reduction is observed. This is backed up with a small reduction in thermal numbers and power draw. If you want to use the might of the RTX 3080 graphics card for compute tasks, V-Ray highlights excellent performance with its score. Memory bandwidth and latency numbers for the system are okay but not spectacular. The 2x8GB 3200MHz 16-18-18 kit is perfectly adequate given PCSpecialist's push for the target price, plus Corsair RGB modules are very aesthetically appealing. Certainly nothing flashy when it comes to performance from the memory though. 3D Mark scoring highlights strong performance from both the CPU and the GPU. Neither component looks particularly overpowered compared to the other, and this implies strong balance from PCSpecialist's choice of parts. Intel's Core i7-10700K is a superb gaming processor thanks to its Skylake-based architecture and high turbo clock speeds. This allows the performant RTX 3080 graphics card to flex its might extremely proficiently at both 1440p and 4K. 4K 60 looks perfectly achievable in all four of our tested gaming titles with the PCSpecialist Gladius i7 system, and if you're a 1440p high refresh rate gamer, the FPS numbers look superb and very alluring. Crank up the load on the system with 1440p high refresh rate gaming and you'll soon enough see the wall power draw nearing half a kilowatt in some titles such as F1 2020. Stress out both the GPU and CPU in its all-core long duration loading state and you can expect to see power draw numbers peak at around 540 watts from the wall. That proves that PCSpecialist's choice of the Corsair RM750X 80 plus gold power supply is a smart one, as proven by the wall power numbers. CPU temperatures are kept in check very well by the front-mounted 240mm AIO and dual Corsair LL120 fans. The Core i7-10700K typically stays below 75 degrees Celsius in its long duration, 125 watt operating state, even with the heat of the graphics card added into the internal system. Plus, the ASUS motherboard VRM temperatures were in the mid-50s, which is absolutely fine. Again, PC Specialist choice of hardware proves smart with the CPU cooler and quality motherboard. Strong cooling performance is also shown by the triple fan Gigabyte RTX 3080 graphics card. The 0 RPM fan mode worked fine, and load temperatures were kept below 80 degrees Celsius even for extended periods of gaming stress. This is very good for maintaining proficient GPU boost clocks whilst also ensuring that the fans still have headroom to push additional cooling capacity as required. And in terms of noise output, the system is quiet and very tolerable when idling, and that's because it's not really drawing all that much power, so it doesn't need all that much cooling. Plus you get the 0 RPM graphics card in there and 0 RPM power supply. Crank up the load on the CPU and you will hear the CPU cooler fans spin up a bit, but they're still very tolerable. And even when you add in full load on the CPU and GPU in a gaming session, the noise output really isn't that bad overall, and I was happy to sit next to the system for an extended session of Grand Theft Auto. If we look at a price comparison for the PC Specialist Gladius i7 at £1,999, certainly that's a big chunk of anybody's paycheck, but you are getting pretty high-end hardware to say the least. Actually, that £1,999 price point is surprisingly aggressive. So we went onto PC Part Picker and spec'd out basically identical hardware. We had to switch to the GPU model, but it's still an RTX 3080, just from a different vendor. And you're actually paying about £60 or so extra to buy the parts yourself and build the system. Now, if you want to do a cheaper version by getting a less high-end motherboard, a lower-end all-in-one liquid cooler, then yes, you can save a few quid and get just below that £1,999 price point, but then you're paying a very small premium to PC Specialist for fundamentally better hardware, a warranty from PC Specialist, and their time and effort to build the system to a high standard. If we look at a comparison to Scan, for example, with a 3XS RTX 3080 equipped system, you'd be paying at least about £200 more based on our quick analysis. And then some other system vendors are actually in the similar to slightly more expensive price point versus PC Specialist. So overall on pricing, I'm actually very impressed. This is cheaper than you could buy the parts, the similar parts, and build it yourself. There we have it then. I think that covers the PC Specialist Gladius i7. Overall, I'm impressed by the system. Really good 4K 60 gaming performance. Superb solution if you want to play at 1440p high refresh rate, because that graphics card is an absolute monster. It just crushes through frames like there's no tomorrow. And the CPU is really good for high refresh rate gaming. We know games love Intel's highly clocked Skylake architecture. And if you want to push a bit further, you've got a high quality motherboard with a good VRM solution, so you can overclock a bit. I think PC Specialist's choice of component is fundamentally superb, quite frankly. I think the balance is excellent. There are no real areas where I look and think, I'm disappointed by that. The one area, I guess, is the chassis, but I wouldn't say I'm disappointed, just I would have liked something a little bit more premium, especially with a little bit more flexibility as to the all-in-one liquid cooler mounting. Other than that, I think the choice of components is very well justified. They work well together, and there's no real waste, other than the RGB fans, I guess, but you know, we all want a premium touch here or there. I guess a little bit harsh to call this kind of a no-frills £2,000 gaming system, if you like. It's got good RGB lighting, it's got one of the fastest graphics cards in the world. It works really well with that Core i7-10700K in there. I guess no frills comes from the point that, you know, you're not going overboard on the RGB with lighting strips left, right and centre. You're not using braided cables or fancy looking special custom components to improve the aesthetics, and I think that's a justifiable smart move from PC Specialist. You just get basically a frames per second monster at a £2,000 price point with impressive cooling performance, really good low noise operation, and a really sweet bundle. Can't complain. Very fair pricing, good overall package, good quality. Impressed. I've been Luke Hill for Kicker. Thank you for watching our video review of the PC Specialist Gladius i7 gaming system. Let us know what you think in the comment section down below. Is there a better partnership than the 10700K and RTX 3080 when you're looking for a gaming system that hits a smart price point without any waste on the GPU or CPU front? Do you think PC Specialist's choice of case was justifiable? Are you happy with the other components? Let us know what you think in the comment section down below. If you like this video, give us a like, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, do all that YouTube stuff. Head on over to the Kikaroo website to check out the full written review. That really helps us out. And make sure you head on over to the Patreon page if you want to support us even more, or our merch store if you want to buy a cool t-shirt like this. I'll see you in the comment section, and I'll see you in the next one too.